What's up, Huge? Today I am here to introduce you to the basics of the development of language. What we're going to be talking about today is a few different things. The first thing that we're going to discuss is exactly why English is such a mess of a language. And we're going to use that as an example to show different aspects of language divergence and convergence, and then we'll split that into learning about the different types of language like Creole, Pidgin, and lingua franca. So have those notes out ready to go. That's what we're covering. All right. So the English language is largely a giant mess because it started in, well, England, hence English, with a series of different invasions throughout the centuries. The people who lived there originally spoke a Celtic language, but then they were invaded by a bunch of different people who spoke Germanic languages and taken over by those different cultures. So Celtic kind of got pushed down and we became a Germanic language first and foremost. But then that also got conquered and got a Romance layer when England was conquered by essentially the French. And during that whole period, you had the Catholic Church in there adding a layer of Latin to everything. So our language is crazy. Let's take a look, though, at what that means when it comes to the development of language. So to the basics of the development of language. Right. Yeah, you should remember that English is a Germanic language. Indo-European, all of those things that I just mentioned there in the bullet points are Indo-European, but specifically of the Germanic branch. So that's the base language, and then the others were kind of like added to it in different ways. All right, the different ways that they were added to it. One is language divergence. If you know what diverge means, then you know exactly what divergence is. It's when when a language splits and becomes different things. Usually that's because the isolation of a people who speak a language leads to change. So in the example of England, once people had conquered the island, they were physically distant from the Germanic origins that they had, and so their language started to change. As examples of how that changed, the German word for milk in English is Milch in German. And so those pronunciations shifted throughout time, Milch becoming milk and developing the dialect, which eventually became the language. Same deal with the German word Vater then becoming father. Father's a great spring point for us to switch to the next one, which is language convergence. And again, if you know what converge means, then you would understand that language convergence is languages coming together. For instance, the original German that said Vater for father also now in English includes the word, languages come together and change it, but includes the word dad, which by no stretch of the imagination is a shortening of the word father. That word dad, we're pretty sure came from the Celtic root, the people who were originally the inhabitants of England. There's debate as to whether they were conquered or just kind of overwhelmed by the numbers of settlers. Another example in modern English would be our word gumbo. That is not an English word. It comes from Creole, which is, well, next up on our list. So let's talk about what Creole is. So there are different types of languages. First off, let's talk Creole. Creole, in general, is a mixture of languages. Okay, so it combines multiple languages, and usually those are languages, but those are the languages that are spoken by the native people of an area. When they're taken over by a colonizer, then they mix together and become a creolized language or a Creole language. By the way, note that there's no one Creole in the world. Each country may have something that they refer to as Creole, but that's not the only Creole that's out there. Okay, so for clarification, though, you should note that Creole, any creolized language or any Creole language, is a full-blown language with all of its complexity and layers and grammar and spelling and all that. Next up is the somewhat confusing Pidgin language. Pidgin languages are often confused with Creole because Pidgin is a combination of languages. However, Pidgin languages are highly simplified combinations. Usually, there's something that you might refer to as like caveman speak. The idea is that two different people who speak different languages are able to communicate in bits and pieces of each other's languages to get across a basic idea, such as you want, you buy $5. So something very simple like that. So they are not, as opposed to Creole, they are not full-blown languages. They're just um, mixtures of stuff that's spoken so that people can get by. Imagine tourists trying to speak the language of the country that they're going to by looking at a dictionary. That would be a pidgin language. Lastly, and probably most importantly, is the term lingua franca. Lingua franca is an exceptionally important thing. A lingua franca is a language that is it's a full-blown language. Full-blown language that people will learn so that they can have trade and diplomacy with people who speak a different language. A great example of this is Swahili throughout Africa. Swahili is actually a Creole language. It's a mixture of a whole bunch of different languages that basically nobody speaks as the native language, but they will learn this full-blown language with all of its depth and complexity so that they can communicate with people from other countries in Africa. English is probably the biggest example of lingua franca. It is essentially the lingua franca of the world and is the lingua franca of the internet. So people will learn English so that they can communicate with other countries around the world or be able to communicate on the internet. All right, there's your basics of the development of language. I hope that helps out, and we'll talk to you next time.